had you heard of Dr. Schofield before you got involved with this project?
Only a little bit. My colleague, City Councillor Dr. Raymond Cho, had explained to me about Dr. Schofield's work in Korea and the importance to Korea and Canada of his work, his missionary work, and his extremely distinguished life. Of course, learned more after becoming involved with the project. But, you know, like many Canadians, sometimes we don't know our history as we should. And I really learned from Councillor Cho, my colleague.
But you mean you didn't know before when you did not involved with this project, right?
Sometime before the project started, Councillor Cho spoke to me, but before that, that's right, I wasn't aware of his work.
And how did you find out about Dr. Schofield?
Well, first of all, Dr. Cho, City Councillor, explained to me about his work. I've done a little bit of my own research as well, because he's an extraordinary man and a very important part of Canadian history and Korean history. And, you know, in Canada, I think sometimes we think about the future, and you have to remember and honor the past if you're going to have a proper future. So once I learned a little bit, I tried to learn more.
And Dr. Schofield is the first foreigner who was buried in the Korean National Cemetery as a man of merit. And he is also known as the 34th member of the Korean independence movement. What do you think about the fact that a Canadian was involved in the Korean independence movement and was buried in Korean National Patriot Cemetery?
I think it's a tremendous honor for Canada that Dr. Schofield is buried in the Korean National Cemetery and is honored in that way. I think it also shows his incredible courage as a person. You know, he went to Korea as a missionary at a time that would have been extremely unusual for a Canadian to go to Korea. And he stood up for what was right at the time of the Japanese occupation. And it's very hard sometimes to stand up for what is right. He stood up for what was right, which is why at that time I understand he was expelled by the Japanese after a few years. Those are incredible honors that are honors to Canada as well as to his family. So I think it's an honor to all of us that he's buried in the cemetery.
Do you feel any proud, have any proud as a Canadian?
I'm very proud as the Mayor of Toronto and as a Canadian. You know, Dr. Schofield was an immigrant from England. He came to Canada when he was about 18. I was an immigrant from England. I came to Canada when I was about 9. So I understand what his life must have been like in a small way. And I think it is such an honor for Canada, his achievements as a veterinarian, as a doctor, and in Korea all honor this country. And I'm very, very proud, and I think his story needs to be told more. Canadians need to know of the contribution this extraordinary man made to Korea and to Canada.
And please tell us about the City of Toronto, who's planned to initiate this project.
Well, we're planning the Dr. Schofield Memorial Garden at the Toronto Zoo. I think it's very appropriate at the Toronto Zoo. Dr. Schofield was a great Canadian. He was a great friend of Korea. The Korean government is supporting this project with a very significant and generous donation of $800,000. The City of Toronto is supporting it through donating the land, and will be maintaining it at the zoo. And it's appropriate it's at the zoo because Dr. Schofield, in addition to his incredible work in Korea, his stand for human rights, his stand against the occupation, his missionary work, was also a very significant veterinarian who made a number of advances. And so that fits. The zoo is the perfect place to do this. I also think it's a little bit symbolic of who Toronto is today. You know, we are a city where over half of us are immigrants, first-generation immigrants. We're also a city where about half of us come from diverse backgrounds, many of whom have been here for generations. This comes together in the zoo. We can all respect the zoo. We all have a love, whatever cultural background, whether newcomer or not, we all have a love for the zoo. And I think this garden being located at the Toronto Zoo is an appropriate honor for Dr. Schofield, and it accomplishes something else. It'll make sure that generations of young Torontonians and young students from around the Toronto region will learn his story. So that unlike me, who learned his story later in life, they will know his story as part of becoming Canadian and being Canadian from the very earliest stage in school. And I think that's very, very important.
And then, can you outline the specific reason that the statue honoring Dr. Schofield is being set up in the Memorial Garden at Metro Toronto Zoo? Is there a special reason?
Well, I think the garden being located at the zoo is for a number of reasons. It's important because Dr. Schofield was a veterinarian. It's important because that's where school children come and young people, and they will have a chance to learn his story. It's important because Toronto is a diverse city. The zoo is one of the places where we all come together. And all Torontonians need to know the story of this great Canadian, not just Korean Canadians, all of us. And it's important because the Korean government is prepared to support this project at the zoo. So it connects his life, his love of animals, his excellence as a veterinarian with the modern Toronto, which is a story of diversity and inclusion. And I'm very proud of this project.
And what benefits do you expect to emanate from this project?
The Toronto Zoo is one of the best zoos in the world. It's got a long and proud history, and I think what this project will do is elevate the status of the zoo, and it will also ensure that school children who regularly visit the zoo can learn about other aspects of our history, and that's very important. To honor Dr. Schofield in a way that educates young people is important. It will happen at the zoo.